I wish Midwestern Marx would host more debates. Yeah. I wish more people were willing.
Yeah, what's up, Eddie?
Yo, how's it going?
Pretty good.
Good.
Pretty good. So you want to do opening statements like we talked about?
Absolutely. You want to go first, or you want me to?
It's totally up to you. I was just gonna say, in addition to that, what I'm gonna do during the debate is I'm just gonna, when you speak, I'm gonna listen to you speak. I'm gonna take notes on the things you say, and then I'm gonna respond to them during my turn. So there's no interruptions. I hope you'll do the same for me. Is that agreeable to you?
Yeah, sounds good to me.
Perfect. Okay, cool. You're welcome to go first if you want to.
Okay, I'll go first. One sec. Hopefully this doesn't take too long.
Or I mean, I could also go first since I've like my side is the official narrative. If you want, it's totally up to you.
Um,
Whatever
Trying
is
to think of
preferable to you.
which way would be better. Actually, yeah, that actually makes sense. Why don't you go first, since yours is the official narrative?
Cool. Yeah. Okay. So I'll just basically lit my opening statement. I'll use to just kind of list in chronology um, what I believe happened, and then during each of our responses, we can get into what we think is wrong with the other person's story. So Um, the USS Liberty was dispatched to Sinai before the Six Day War broke out. The Six Day War broke out while it was en route to Sinai. By the time it arrived, it was the fourth day of the war. During its journey, however, to the Sinai Peninsula, the UN ambassador said there were no assets within 100 miles of the battle zone, none naval or air. Evidently, it wasn't true. The Liberty was cabled to stay 100 nautical miles away from the battle zone 5 times, but those cables were never received by the Liberty. They were routed to different places around the globe, and it was a really haphazard communications failure for the United States military. The Liberty arrived in the region on June 8th. That's the fourth day of the Six Day War. On June 8th, in the morning, just after a general quarters drill on the Liberty, there was an explosion in El Arish, and Israeli forces in El Arish believed that they were being shelled by an Egyptian ship that they could see just off the shore. In reality, that ship was the USS Liberty. It was 14 nautical miles off the coast of Sinai, off the coast of El Arish, not 100 nautical miles. Remember, these people didn't believe that there were any American assets anywhere near, due to the fact that we had told them there weren't. So they dispatched aircraft from a nearby mission in Egypt to find the ship responsible. They see the Liberty just off the coast, like I said. It's identified as a warship, quote unquote warship, and the attack order is given. The aerial attack lasted 14 minutes. Israel sent Navy motor torpedo boats and helicopters to for rescue and identification. So they talk about this in the transcript. Just the Navy sending out MTBs for rescue. We should dispatch some helicopters. And the Air Force dispatches helicopters. The Navy dispatches MTBs. The Liberty's machine gun mount 53 opened fire and blanketed the middle MTB boat. At this point, they were not firing upon the Liberty. Israel believed that they were under fire, or the MTBs believed that they were under fire, and they returned fire at a range of 2,000 yards, first with machine guns and then with 5 torpedoes. One made contact. The attack completely ceased after contact with the torpedo was made to the Liberty, according to the ship's captain, and according to Lloyd Painter, who is another member of the crew. This is also corroborated by virtually every firsthand source. The MTB signaled the Liberty if they needed assistance. That's again according to the captain of the ship, William Loren McGonigal. Israel's rescue helicopters attempted to make contact with the Liberty, but were waved off. There was another helicopter that also approached. That was a helicopter that actually had a U.S. Navy attaché on it, and he was trying to find out if there were casualties on the ship, but that helicopter was waved off as well. Sometime after this, several hours on this exact same day the Liberty was attacked, Egypt surrendered. They agreed to the ceasefire that was proposed on June 7th, the day prior. Jordan had surrendered the previous day, and Syria would go on to surrender 2 days later. So at this point, the war was virtually over, and there's not really an incentive to draw America into it. The next morning, the Liberty rendezvoused with the USS Davis in Massey for ship-to-ship aid. And that's the end of the story.
All right. Mine might be a little bit longer than that, but I'll
Okay.
refrain from responding to any of your points right now and just give my opening statement. But
Sure.
When I first began investigating this case of the USS Liberty, I was doing so with an open mind and the goal of being as objective as possible, because I'm not one of these JQers who schizophrenically looks for Jewish involvement in every important political issue in order to blame everything on them. But the allegations of a deliberate Israeli attack on the US, or if the allegations of a deliberate Israeli attack on the USS Liberty were nothing more than a JQ conspiracy theory, I would be more than happy to just admit that, and I would even argue that position, and that's how I felt. However, the more I looked into the attack and the more evidence I found that it was in fact deliberate, to the point where I can't help but question the motivations of anyone who would dismiss these allegations as a mere conspiracy theory. Given the evidence, I don't see any way you can confidently claim the attack was an accident or a simple case of accidental friendly fire unless your goal is to simply parrot the narratives of the Israeli government, which has evolved over the years. There's a long list of high ranking US officials who believe that the attack was a deliberate false flag effort that was covered up by the Lyndon B. Johnson administration under massive pressure from their Israeli allies. In fact, the day after the attack happened, Lyndon B. Johnson himself told Newsweek that the attack must have been deliberate. But this story was later suppressed, and LBJ would change his mind under pressure from Israeli officials. Those who think the attack was deliberate are not a bunch of conspiracy theorists, but rather U.S. intelligence officials, naval officers and lawyers, high ranking politicians, military analysts, etc. In fact, it seems the only people who were willing to push the "it was an accident" narrative were the Israeli government officials themselves and those who were directly coerced by them. The overwhelming majority of naval personnel who survived the attack believed that it was a deliberate and intentionally planned false flag operation by the Israelis, and many of them have spoken out since. Meanwhile, it's difficult to find any survivors from the attack who believe the Israeli government narrative that they meant to attack Egypt but made a mistake in the fog of war. While fog of war accidents usually occur when it's dark out, either at night or in adverse weather conditions, and almost always in a chaotic, active combat zone, the USS Liberty was attacked in broad daylight on a clear day with a massive American flag waving in the wind for all to see. It was not in an active combat zone, but rather sailing international waters as it had done since 1963 with Israel's full knowledge. Between 6 o'clock and 6:30 a.m., Israel had sent out recon jets, which flew over the Liberty 6 to 13 times. Another recon jet was sent out at 9 a.m., flying even lower, to which the men on board the Liberty waved at their supposed Israeli allies. The USS Liberty had had its name freshly painted in large letters on both sides of the ship, in English, not Arabic, which is what Egyptian ships would have. And the Israeli pilots did spot the signs that this was an American ship. However, when those pilots told their commanding officers that the ship was American, they were told to attack anyways, as the flag and the lettering were supposedly Egyptian camouflage. Israel would later claim that they didn't see the lettering or the American flag, but this has been proven demonstrably false by internal communications that have since been released. And we have a lot of evidence from now declassified documents like this, showing that Israel knew exactly what it was doing as it launched and continued the attack on the Liberty. Former U.S. Ambassador to Lebanon, Dwight Porter, reported a conversation that was picked up by an NSA aircraft between the Israeli Air Force and an Israeli war room, where a pilot asks, "This is an American ship. Do we still attack?" "Yes, follow orders," the war room said back. The Israeli pilot replied, "But sir, this is an American ship. I can see the flag." "Never mind. Hit it," the war room ordered. Israeli Chief Air Force Controller Shmuel Kislev ignored all the evidence that he was attacking an American ship and refused to call off the attacks or even launch a further recon investigation before continuing them. Only after the attacks did he ask them to find out whose ship it was, and when asked his thoughts, he twice said, "Probably American," to the shock of his personnel. After the attack, every U.S. official, including LBJ himself, seemed to believe it was intentional and pre planned. Thomas Hughes, the director of the U.S. State Department Intelligence Bureau, said, "We were all quite convinced the Israelis knew what they were doing." NSA Director Michael Carter said it couldn't be anything but deliberate. Clark Clifford, head of the president's Foreign Intelligence Advisory Board, said it's inconceivable that this was an accident. And CIA Director Richard Helms said, "I don't think there can be any doubt that the Israelis knew exactly what they were doing." The Israelis quickly scrambled to control the narrative surrounding their failed false flag attack in order to salvage their relationship with America. They decided to quickly apologize for the event publicly and claim that it was a tragic accident. They then determined that they would need to get the US state on board with this narrative, which would then trickle down to the American public. The Israelis contacted LBJ as fast as possible to begin negotiations and threatened that if he didn't parrot their narrative, he would be smeared as anti Semitic. Go figure. Something which would have been disastrous for the president's upcoming electoral hopes, as he was relying on the Jewish American vote. Reluctantly, LBJ agreed to sweep everything under the rug, and the cover up began. Surviving naval personnel from the Liberty were visited the day after the attack and told not to accuse Israel of waging the attack on purpose. This is corroborated by Thomas Brooks, the director of naval intelligence at the time. A representative from New York by the name of Otis Pike demanded an investigation, which was ignored by the media under pressure from Israel. Israeli official Dan Patir bragged in a leaked cable that he was able to get prominent journalists in America to ignore the story, and a thorough investigation never happened. Declassified documents have even revealed that LBJ's administration floated the idea of sinking the Liberty themselves in order to avoid photo evidence of it or further investigation. Assistant Secretary of State Lucius Battle later came out and said, "We failed to let it come out publicly at the time. We ignored it for all practical purposes, and we shouldn't have." NSA Chief of Staff Gerard Burke said, "There was absolutely no question in anyone's mind that the Israelis had done it deliberately. I was angrier because of the cover-up, if that's possible, than of the incident itself." Even more recently, the event was still being covered up as U.S. naval officers were barred from asking any questions about the Liberty to the Israeli ambassador when he visited in 2012. In the early 2000s, a large-scale citizens investigation was launched by the former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Thomas Moorer, involving many high-ranking U.S. officials. The report gathered testimonies from many of those involved, including important naval lawyers who were directly told to cover up evidence of a deliberate attack at first, but were now prepared to blow the whistle. The investigation concluded that Israel did in fact launch the attack deliberately and launched a massive cover-up operation in the aftermath, which Moore said was one of the most obvious he'd ever seen in his life. We can be relatively certain that the attack was deliberate and planned, but what we don't know for sure is what the motive was, although potential motives exist in abundance. For one, Israel had just massacred 1,200 Egyptian prisoners of war, forcing them to dig their own graves, and they didn't want this to be discovered by the American spy ship. Secondly, Israel wanted to ramp up the Six-Day War while the U.S. wanted to wind it down. And if the U.S. thought that it was Egypt who attacked the USS Liberty, this would have given them incentive to get more involved and continue the war effort, which could potentially lead to more land for Israel. Lastly, the U.S. had forbid Israel from seizing the Golan Heights region that belonged to Syria, but they did it anyways the day after the Liberty was attacked, meaning it could have been a way to prevent the U.S. from meddling in their plans for the region. I don't know how anyone could look at all this evidence and confidently claim that Israel attacked the Liberty by accident, or that there was no cover-up to follow. The U.S. is not simply a puppet of Israel, but Israel does have its own interests, which sometimes diverge slightly from the interests of the United States. Both countries influence each other, and the USS Liberty event is an example of Israel attempting to manipulate the U.S. into doing exactly what it wants. If you still believe the USS Liberty attack was an accident, please tell me how much you're getting paid by Zionist organizations. Sorry, that was a bit long.
Yeah, no worries. I love the accusation at the end there. So let's get into it. I'm not gonna. I was gonna go in order. I'm not gonna go in order because I want to attack something that you said that was just blatantly false. First, you said that you have this, and I'm gonna ask you a question here. I just need a one-word response. You said that the Israeli fighter jet pilots said, "But sir, it's an American ship," and then they were ordered to attack anyway. Where did you learn that?
That was reported by, who was that? It was reported by some U.S. government official who was high ranking at the time.
Yep. Where did you read about it?
That was from the Naval Intelligence government website.
Could you link that below the thing? Because I think you're lying. I think it's from a Haaretz article. that you probably don't have the subscription to read, and that's why you don't know what's contained within it.
I
Okay,
I
this is
do
not
have a
corroborated.
Haaretz subscription, and that's
One
not where
second,
I got the article
Eddie.
from.
Eddie, this is not corroborated by anything. So what this article
It's
or what
it's
this
from
claim
one of the
originates
highest
from,
ranking U.S. government
Eddie,
officials who was in charge
Eddie,
at the time.
Eddie.
Can't name
Again, I
them.
know exactly what you're
It's not. I didn't
referencing.
even read any Haaretz articles, and I do
One
have the
second, Eddie.
Haaretz
Eddie, let
subscription.
me respond. So I know
Well,
what
you
this
asked
story
me a
is.
question. Let me give you
This is a
the
story.
source
This is
here.
not a story that references any transcript.
Let me
This
give
is
you
a
the source.
story. Yeah, one second, Eddie. This is a story that references what one man says he heard another man say that he heard another man say. In reality, that story was told a long time ago and has been continued to be told to this day. It started back when the transcripts were classified. They're not classified anymore. So what he's referencing is the NSA intercepts, or what somebody thought they heard on the NSA intercepts, or what they thought they heard somebody else say they heard on the NSA intercepts. In reality, the NSA intercepts are declassified. I linked them below this space. You can read them. The NSA intercepts are from helicopter pilots. And spoiler alert, the helicopters never attacked the USS Liberty. So that's not true. It didn't happen. This is a long debunked myth. It's not the case that any pilots said, but sir, it's an American ship, and continued to attack. We have the fighter jet pilot transcripts too, between State, the controllers, and the pilots, Cursa and Royal, the two squadrons of Mystere and Mirage fighter jets that were attacking the USS Liberty. They passed several times and looked for a flag, and they didn't find one. It was probably shot away on the first pass. The problem is that these men were flying at 20,000 feet the majority of the time, and that's why they didn't see a flag. I interviewed a U.S. naval aviator the other day, and he said that when you're flying even just a couple hundred feet above a ship, it's just a little tiny blip in front of you, and you're not going to be able to make out any details. You're relying on, and it's not even your choice whether you attack or not. It's ultimately State's choice whether you're going to attack. Your order to attack, they're not identifying anything on it. They just had this explosion in El Arish. They believe that their position is being shelled. Here's a ship that's fleeing towards the port of Said, the USS Liberty. They believe it to be an Egyptian ship. They engage it. Okay. So that's what happened. There was never any exchange. But sir, it's an American ship. Didn't happen. Never happened. It's completely false. It's completely debunked. I linked below this space both the transcripts between the Israeli fighter jet pilots and the NSA intercepts that are accused here of having that contained within them, even though the helicopters never attacked the USS Liberty. They were rescue helicopters. Most of their job was looking for lifeboats and trying to pull somebody up out of the lifeboats to identify the nationality of the people on board them. But they found that there was no lifeboats. There was no people in the lifeboats when they found them. You referenced a lot of people, and they said, yeah, there's no way it's not deliberate. These are a lot
Yeah,
of
a
people,
lot
a
of
lot
people
of
who are
anyway.
all high-ranking
Eddie,
U.S. government
Eddie,
officials who
Eddie,
are
did I interrupt
pro-Israel,
you?
by the way.
Did I interrupt you, Eddie?
Okay,
Okay.
you can
Okay.
finish. I'll write
Okay.
down your
Yeah.
points and
Right.
then
Right.
I'll
Okay.
respond.
So
My
yeah,
bad.
please do, because that's exactly what I did for you. I paid you that courtesy. You cited a lot
You're
of
so
people with a lot of different opinions, and at the end of the day, that's all they are, is opinions. You have a different opinion, and I have a different opinion, and that's why we're talking about it. Citing somebody else's opinion doesn't get us anywhere. Okay. I could just as easily cite the captain of the ship for almost his entire life believed that it wasn't an intentional attack. Okay. Until just before he died, when he was lied to by the Liberty Veterans Association about fighter jets that were dispatched to the Liberty and recalled, but they weren't recalled until after the attack was over. You talked about Israel quickly apologizing for the attack. They did quickly apologize. In fact, Israel were the ones who notified the United States government that the ship was attacked. They didn't know it was attacked until Israel got in touch with them and notified them that they had attacked an American ship, because they realized after the attack that it was an American ship and signaled for help. He said that there's never been a thorough investigation into this attack, which is completely patently false. There was the United States Naval Court of Inquiry on June 10th. That's 2 days after the attack, 1967. There was the June 13th, 1967 Central Intelligence Agency report investigation. There was the Joint Chiefs of Staff investigation in June of 1967. There was the Clark Clifford investigation in July of 1967. There was the Senate Foreign Relations Committee investigation, where Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara was cross-examined in July of 1967. There was the Senate and House Armed Services Committee that investigated military communications into the USS Liberty, where McNamara was interrogated in February of 1968. There was the House Appropriations Committee in May 10th of 1971 that investigated this. There was the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence that investigated claims from crewman James Enns, who wrote a book. He was the first person to write a book in the year 1979, and they investigated in 1979. There was the NSA investigation in 1981. There was the House Armed Service Committee probe that was launched in response to the Liberty Veterans Association's claims about the attack but they found no evidence that any of those claims were substantiated. Okay, there have been so many investigations into this, not just on the American side, but also on the Israeli side. Not only did the Israelis apologize for this and be the first ones to notify America that the ship had been attacked, they paid reparations on top of that. Okay, this was a very clear example of mistaken identity. We do it all the time. Okay, where we friendly fire on our own people. This isn't even to bring in the amount of times that
Not
we've
in
lit up
international.
Brit. 1 second, Eddie. Not finished. This is not
Oh
even to
my
bring up
God.
the amount of times that we've opened fire on British ships. Okay, we literally strafed our own ship. The United States Coast Guard Point Welcome in 1966 in Vietnam. Around dawn, the Point Welcome was on patrol when it was repeatedly strafed and bombed by U.S. aircraft. In 1991, in Desert Storm, 2 U.S. A-10 Warthogs attacked a group of U.S. military vehicles from the 3rd Armored Cavalry Regiment. In Iraq, in 2003, a U.S. F-15 mistakenly bombed a U.S. Special Forces convoy in northern Iraq near Mosul. Okay, in 1988, the USS Vicentes, okay, a U.S. Guided missile cruiser, literally shot down an entire Iran air flight, killing 299 passengers in 1988. Okay, so to act like this shit never happened is just retarded. Okay, anyone who acts as if friendly fire never happens is retarded. Okay. But this is the only time that we claim it's deliberate. Why? Because the Jews did it. Okay, so most of your argument is bullshit. It's fully reliant on other people's opinions, which are completely irrelevant to any piece of evidence that this was or was not a deliberate attack. If you want to bring up a piece of evidence, hopefully one that's not somebody else's opinion, I'd love to hear it, considering your opening statement started by you talking about the mounting evidence as you started to research this issue. I'd love to see actual pieces of material evidence. Transcripts. I'd love to hear testimony from like people who were on the ship, the Naval Court of Inquiry, right? What did they say in the Naval Court of Inquiry? All fucking fingers point to it being an accidental attack. Read Captain McGonagall's testimony. Captain McGonagall's testimony very clearly says that when Machine Gun Mount 53 of the USS Liberty opened fire on the MTB motor torpedo boats, he says that he himself, if he were on the MTBs, would have believed that he was under attack and opened fire himself. Go ahead.
So you said you didn't want me to quote what people had said about the event, people who were directly involved. You want to hear real evidence like testimonies? I mean, everything I gave you were testimonies from
primary. No,
Aha!
hold
Don't
up, hold
interrupt
up.
me, Cam.
No. You
Stop
asked me a question.
interrupting
Now
me.
let me
I
answer. You
gave
asked
you
me a
the
question.
courtesy of
You
being
asked me a
kind
question.
and letting
You
you
asked me a
finish.
question.
Now let
You
me
asked me a
finish.
question. You asked me a
No,
question. There's a difference
no, I
between
did.
somebody's
You asked me a
opinion
question at
who's
first
not
too, and then
related
you
to it.
interrupted and rattled off 100 things. No,
I don't
let
care
me
about
give
the
my
opinion of
response.
some admiral who
Let me
wasn't
give my
there.
response. Testimonies, eyewitness testimonies, and testimonies from people who were involved in the negotiations and the investigation afterwards were what I gave you from some of the most credible people, or credible on this issue, because the U.S. government and U.S. State Department usually doesn't go against Israel. But in this case, you have the director of the CIA directly saying that the attack was deliberate in countering the Israeli narrative. You have Lyndon B. Johnson himself the day after the attack was carried out. I can read off a whole bunch of testimonies to you right now if you want, but that is direct evidence. And it's not just a few, right? It's not just that a few people thought that it was a deliberate attack, and but about half the other people had the opposite opinion. The vast overwhelming majority of eyewitness testimony, survivors from the USS Liberty, say that there's no way it wasn't a deliberate attack, and they've spoken out about it repeatedly. I couldn't find the one person from the ship who survived the attack who was prominently speaking out and saying that the Israeli government narrative was correct. Now, to answer the question about friendly fire cases happening in the past, right? I'm not saying friendly fire never happens in the fog of war. What I'm saying is that there was no fog of war here. It wasn't in a combat zone. All of those things you mentioned, like one during Operation Desert Storm or one during Vietnam, these were in active combat zones where they couldn't tell what was going on. This was the middle of the day, not the middle of the night. It was a clear day. There was a massive U.S. flag waving in the wind that they could see clearly. Um, and it was not in an active combat zone, it was in international waters. So the idea that Israel just made an oopsie and assumed that this was an Egyptian ship when they had known that the USS Liberty was sailing around in these international waters since 1963, I mean, that is just unbelievably naive. And the reason why so many investigations later had to be launched was because the initial investigation from the Naval Court of Inquiry was so pathetic, and the follow-up investigations, unfortunately, weren't able to be as thorough. And I mean, I give zero credit to the investigations, quote unquote, carried out by the Israeli government. We all know how that works. They're never going to in fact, even the pilots who launched this attack, sure, Israel paid reparations to the victims of the USS Liberty as part of the negotiations with the US, but they never punished the pilots. All of the pilots who did this were exonerated, which, even if this was a mistake, you would expect the Israeli government to punish the people who did it for making a mistake that ended up getting, dozens of people killed. But the original inquiry was so bad, they only asked the surviving naval personnel who were there like 9 to 13 questions each, and it was wrapped up in a couple days. Whereas when there have been other cases of friendly fire events, the personnel were asked hundreds or even thousands of questions. And it took hours, or I mean, sorry, not hours, it took weeks or months of deliberation to come to a decision. Here, they just interviewed or asked them a couple questions and then went with the Israeli government narrative and carried on their way. And basically, what happened was there was a negotiation between the Israelis and President Lyndon B. Johnson, because so many people in the American State Department were furious about this, which is why there are so many testimonies of people who were close to the case saying that everybody knew it was deliberate and the Israelis knew exactly what they were doing, because they did know that. They just decided that they had to cover it up for their buddy Israel in order to not ruin their reputation, which is why Israel had to come out and make a public apology, say that it was an accident, and then pay off the victims, just to give them make the narrative more plausible. But the idea that the hyper advanced Israeli military receiving all these weapons, which ironically, some of the weapons that they hit the Liberty with were U.S. weapons. The idea that they have all this advanced military machinery and equipment, but they can't tell that it's a U.S. ship that looks nothing like any of the ships that the Egyptians have. I mean, the ship that they said they thought it was is 2 times smaller, or half the size of the USS Liberty. And it certainly doesn't have an American flag or English letters on the side of it. Everything's in Arabic. So, I mean, you have to be incredibly naive to just digest the Israeli government narrative on this. And what surprises me, too, is that you claim to be an American patriot. So why vouch for Israel and Israel's narrative when even high-ranking American officials were openly saying that this was absolutely a deliberate attack? This is something that every American patriot should be aligned on. Why is Israel meddling in our politics and deliberately attacking an American ship?
Yeah, cool. So I guess we'll just go in reverse again. I claim to be an American patriot, so why am I defending Israel? Well, this isn't just an accusation against Israel. As you've said numerous times, there was a cover up from the United States government. I'm defending my country, right? You're making accusations against my country. Phil Turney is making accusations against my country. The entire LVA is making accusations against my country that they colluded with a foreign government to kill American sailors. That's why I'm hell bent on telling the truth about this story. Let's bring it back. You didn't let me answer the question you asked me while you were speaking, so I'll answer it now. As far as testimony from people who weren't there, you're not citing their testimony. So generally, when we're talking about testimony in the form of evidence, we're going to be talking about things like this happened at this point, which makes me think it's deliberate. This happened at this point, that makes me think it's deliberate from eyewitness accounts, right? I don't care what some admiral who wasn't there says his opinion is, right? His opinion is driven by something, probably some piece of evidence he saw. If you have that evidence, present it to me. So far, all you've presented in this case is they had an American flag, they had English letters on the side of the ship, therefore they should have known. Everyone else says it's deliberate, therefore I think it's deliberate. That's not an argument, okay? Your opinion should be based on something other than other people's opinion, okay? Why might they not have seen the lettering on the side of the ship or the flag? Well, maybe not the flag because they're flying at 20,000 feet. Why might they not have seen the lettering on the side of the ship? Well, the only people in a position to see the lettering on the side of the ship were the MTB motor torpedo boats. Okay, by the time the MTBs arrived on scene, the ship was shrouded in thick black smoke, and they were approaching from the bow side of the ship. Sorry, the stern side of the ship. Okay, the back side of the ship, which is probably a leading reason why they weren't able to see the flag. The smoke combined with the fact they were approaching from the rear and looking at it from back to front, not side to side. Okay, so they're not going to see a flowing American flag. On top of that, you just continue to reference like LBJ said he believed it was deliberate at one point. I don't even know if that's true, but if it is true, who the fuck cares? His opinion is irrelevant, right? Because it's an opinion. Cite me evidence that leads you to the opinion that it was an intentional attack, of which you have cited zero, except one faulty claim that they said, but sir, it's an American ship. That never happened. That claim was started back when those documents that they're referencing were not declassified yet. And it was a guy who says, I heard another guy say, he heard another guy say this is what's in them. Okay. Now those documents are declassified. And again, I linked them below this space. Anyone in here can go read them. Okay. If you think that that's what it says in them, it doesn't. And by the way, the transcripts they're referencing are helipilot transcripts. Hate to break it to you, the helicopters never fucking attacked the USS Liberty. Nobody in the LVA makes that claim. Captain McGonigal doesn't make that claim. Nobody in the U.S. government makes that claim. Nobody makes that claim. Okay, it didn't happen. So, right on its face, false. On top of that, you said there was no fog of war. This wasn't a combat zone. Bullshit. It wasn't a combat zone. Phil Turney, Joe Medders, Larry Bowen, every person who was on the ship who speaks out publicly talks about how they could see bombs dropping and explosions on the shore. They were 14 miles off the coast of Sinai, right by El Arish. There were explosions in El Arish. Israelis in those positions believed that they were being attacked. And when they dispatched the Air Force, they found this ship, the Liberty, fleeing at what they believed was 20 knots. Later, it would turn out that's not the case, towards the port of Said. They believed it was fleeing the site of an attack. And so they engaged it very quickly because they were trying to catch it before it entered Egyptian waters. It was never going to enter Egyptian waters, but they thought that's what it was doing. Okay, so there absolutely was fog of war in this instance. They had what they believed was an attack, and they had what they believed was an attacker. So they attacked the attacker. So yeah, let me just, what else did you say? You said there was a negotiation between LBJ and the Israelis to drag the U.S. into the war. Sorry, you believe there was a negotiation between LBJ and the Israelis to cover it up. I'd love to see a source for that. On top of that, you talked earlier about how this whole thing was to drag America into the war. I'll state again, Egypt surrendered only a few hours after the USS Liberty had been attacked. Jordan surrendered the prior day, and Syria surrendered 2 days later. There was no incentive to drag America into this war. I just want to get this straight. And you tell me in your turn if this is pretty much is a summary of what you think happened in your retarded little brain. Okay. So Egypt had no air force. Israel destroyed 90+% of Egypt's air force on the first day of the war. They destroyed it on the tarmac. If you don't believe me, Britannica, okay? Check Britannica. So Egypt has no air force. So Israel decides, I've got a great idea, guys. We're going to frame Egypt. We're going to attack an American ship, and we're going to frame Egypt. Well, sir, how are we going to attack them? We're going to attack them by air. But, sir, Egypt doesn't have an air force. No one will buy that. We don't give a fuck. Yep, that makes sense. So they flew Dassault, Mirage, and Mystere fighter jets in the attack against the USS Liberty, knowing that Egypt flies MiGs with giant red nose cones on the front of them. That doesn't make any fucking sense. Okay, why weren't the jets equipped with munitions to take out the Liberty? Huh? Why'd they have to dispatch MTBs to attack the Liberty? Doesn't make any fucking sense. Because, if I'm planning a deliberate attack, probably what I'm going to do is if I'm attacking by air, which already doesn't make any sense because the Egyptians don't have an air force, I'm going to say, all right, stick some iron bombs on those jets. They're capable of carrying them. Drop 5 iron bombs through the deck of that ship and send it straight to the fucking bottom on the first pass. Never happened. They dropped napalm on the deck. And I'm sure, as both you and I know, napalm doesn't sink ships. Fire doesn't burn metal, right? So why would they drop napalm? Well, because they were on a different mission and they were dispatched to attack this ship that they believed was attacking the shore of El Arish, right? If it was deliberate and pre-planned, why wasn't it outfitted with the correct munitions? Huh? Why not? Egypt, and then again, Egypt surrendered only a few hours after the attack. So they had Egypt on the ropes. They knew Egypt didn't have an air force. They attacked it by air with not Russian MiGs that they were flying, MiG-21s. Instead, they attacked it with Dassault French Mirage and Mystère fighter jets that they knew Egypt didn't have. They didn't come with the correct munitions. And then this is the funniest part to me is you talk about survivor testimony. You're talking about people from the LVA, Phil Turney, Joe Metters, Larry Bowen, all those fucking schmucks, right? They say the planes were unmarked. They were freshly painted black. There was no markings on them. First of all, it doesn't make any sense because if that was the case, those jets would have been shot down by their own AA guns. On top of that, they all remember apparently seeing the Israeli flag flying from the masts of the motor torpedo boats. Why the hell would you fly unmarked jets, first of all, that aren't Russian MiG-21s? Why would you go through the trouble of unmarking them when you know that it's not even the correct plane, and the Egyptians don't have an air force, and then bring in motor torpedo boats that are proudly flying the Israeli flag if you're trying to cover it up? Doesn't make a whole lot of sense, especially when you can just take that flag off off the MTBs and nobody would be the wiser. But they all remember seeing it. Top of that, Theodore Afstern, who is one of the crewmates, he recalls seeing a Jewish officer on the deck. He's the quartermaster. He recalls seeing a Jewish officer on the deck crying because he saw the Star of David on the wing of one of these airplanes. My assertion is that after 58 years, the testimony of a lot of these men is not only riddled with inconsistency due to poor memory, but also riddled with bias. And in many cases, probably rightfully so. If the Israelis accidentally killed a bunch of my friends, I'd be pretty fucking pissed off about it. Maybe even to the point that I would go and publicly lie about it. And I think that's exactly what's happening because their testimony does not align with the facts. And if you want to bring up evidence to support your claim that the Liberty was intentionally attacked, please cite me evidence, not other people's opinions. So far, all you have cited is the opinions of other people. Think for yourself and cite evidence, whether it be testimony recently after the attack, or it be some objective primary source, like a transcript between Israeli fighter jet pilots and their controllers in state, or transcripts between the helo pilots and their controllers. Something primary. The deck log of the USS Liberty, I linked that below as well. Something primary. Some kind of evidence that supports your claim. So far, all you've cited is opinions. Go ahead.
So I'll just go point by point through that. I mean, first of all, they didn't only attack the ship with napalm. And you know what does sink ships is torpedoes. And I believe you said that those torpedo boats were sent in on a rescue mission. Those torpedo boats were sent in and they launched torpedoes at the ship, which I believe that was the attack that ended up killing 25 people, 25 American troops at once. And by the way, as an American patriot myself, I don't appreciate you referring to our former veterans as a bunch of schmucks, right? That seems a little bit disrespectful to call our troops who are fighting for our freedom over there in the Middle East a bunch of schmucks. How rude. But to your argument about the 6-Day War, because I think this is an interesting one, it's well known that the UN had to force a peace agreement because Israel wanted to keep seizing land. So the idea that these Arab countries surrendering means that Israel didn't want to keep the war going and keep the theft of land going. No, they absolutely did, and the U.S. absolutely didn't. And this was part of the negotiations between LBJ and the Israeli government that had been ongoing before the attack, and of course took on a new dimension after the attack. So it was that there is the perfect motive. The U.S. wanted to wind down the war. They were eventually successful because this false flag operation failed. The UN and U.S. were pressuring them to end the war. Israel wanted to keep the war going. Well, if you could trick the U.S. into thinking that Egypt just sunk one of your ships, well, then you can keep the war going and you can keep seizing Egyptian or Syrian or Jordanian or Lebanese land or whatever. You mentioned wanting to defend the integrity of your country by defending them from this so-called conspiracy theory that they lied in order to protect Israel's reputation. But I mean, take it up with the CIA director, take it up with LBJ himself. These are the people who said that it was a cover-up in a false flag operation. If what being a patriot means isn't blindly defending your State Department, blindly defending your government whenever they tell you something or whenever they do something. It's actually looking out for what's in the best interest of your whole country. And, allowing Israel to bomb U.S. ships and U.S. service members with impunity is certainly not in the best interest of our country. Another claim about the helicopters. You said that the helicopters. You implied that I was claiming the helicopters were attacking. I never said that. In fact, the helicopters were actually sent for rescue after Israel bombed and then torpedo boated this ship. They did send helicopters in for rescue, which were rejected by all of the people there. Obviously, why would they want Israeli help after Israel had just bombed them? Um, and I just wonder if it's so difficult to tell what kind of ship this was. If the Israeli military doesn't have the ability to tell what kind of ship this is, what country this ship belongs to, what kind of guns this ship has on it, which are almost none, by the way. There were like a few tiny guns. I think there were 4 guns that were not high caliber attached to the ship. So the idea that they could have been shelling anybody is quite ridiculous. It was a ship that was a spy ship that was actually disguised as like a technical like research ship, but in reality they were spying for the Americans. But where was I going with that? What was I saying? The helicopters. Oh yeah. So why did they send the recon jets the 6 to 13 times in the morning, and then again even lower at 9 a.m. if they still couldn't tell it was an American ship? I mean, that on its face, you have to be so naive to believe because of the size of these flags that are on these ships. It was a giant American flag waving in the wind. But even if I give you that the flag was too small for them to see, what was the point of sending the recon jets then? What is the point of sending these jets to scout out what's going on? And I mean, the idea in and of itself that they weren't able to tell that this is an American ship, they absolutely would have been. As I said, the Egyptian ship that they supposedly mistook it for was about half the size of this one and didn't have a giant American flag waving in the wind. But this is evidence. I mean, a lot of the quote unquote evidence that you cited was just what Israeli military or Israeli government officials had to say about it, right? The U.S. officials who I cited, not only are the vast majority of actual American military personnel who were there, not only do the vast majority of them say that the attack was deliberate and there is no way that it couldn't have been deliberate, so do the vast majority of the people who were involved in negotiations with the Israelis after that. So do the people who were involved or in proximity to the cover up that happened after that. That is evidence, eyewitness testimony from people who were involved in the geopolitical negotiations that followed a very influential and prominent geopolitical event is evidence. Not only that, if you want me to cite testimonies, yeah, I spared everyone doing this because the vast majority of people who were actually there think the same way. But yeah, we could go through the testimonies of every single person who was there, and they can tell you that it was a clear day, that they were not in an actual combat zone, that they were in international waters, that they waved at the Israeli ship as it flew by, and it still came back and ended up bombing them. All of this is evidence that makes it nearly impossible to believe, unless you're just parroting the Israeli government narrative for whatever reason. I won't assume what reason that is. All of this is evidence that would lead any rational person to believe that this was a planned and deliberate attack, especially given the military capabilities that Israel had. I couldn't keep up with everything that you said in that long and seemingly angry rant. Um, but I'll try to do a better job of writing down your points this next time.
Yeah, sure. So let's start with what you said in your very beginning of that. Okay, you said that Israel didn't just attack by air, but they sent these torpedo boats, and you ridiculed me for saying that they were sent for rescue. You said they actually shot the USS Liberty with a torpedo, and it's true. They did shoot the USS Liberty with a torpedo, and it's also true that they were dispatched for rescue. If you read the transcripts between the Israeli fighter pilots state and their controllers that I linked below, and I'm sure you'll never read, you will see that at the end of the transcript, state says that Navy dispatched MTB motor torpedo boats for rescue of the ship. The Air Force then says, we'll dispatch our helicopters. Okay. Now, why then, if they were there for rescue, did the motor torpedo boats shoot a torpedo? Well, I already answered this question. Okay. If you were listening in the beginning, Captain McGonigal, Captain William Loren McGonigal, the commanding officer of the USS Liberty, the man that had the best view of what was going on because he was on the bridge the entire time, barking orders at people and trying to get the attack under management. Okay. This man says that the torpedo boats approached the USS Liberty, closing a distance of 2,000 yards to 500 yards, traveling at 27 to 30 knots. This attack was no longer than 2 minutes long. He says what happens is around 2,000 yards, when they were closing on the USS Liberty, they would eventually mill around 500 yards. So they had to close a distance of 1,500 yards. Okay. He says at this point, machine gun mount 53 of the USS Liberty opened fire on the middle MTB motor torpedo boat. He says that the fire blanketed the middle boat and the fire was extremely effective. Okay, meaning that it was they lit the fucking middle boat up, right? Okay, he says, the captain says that if he were on that middle torpedo boat, he would surely believe he was under attack and return fire. And that's exactly what the Israelis did. While they closed this 1,500-yard gap between, a duration of roughly a minute and 30 seconds, they first opened fire with their machine guns, and then they launched 5 torpedoes, 4 of which missed the ship, 1 of which hit the ship. Captain McGonigal and Lloyd Painter both say in their Navy Court of Inquiry testimony that after the torpedo struck the USS Liberty, the attack completely stopped. This is 3 days after the attack that they're recounting this. They have the most fresh memory you could possibly have of what went down. Okay. You then said, it's well known that Israel wanted to keep stealing land. Surrender of the other countries means nothing. Okay. Oh, I don't know where this notion of it's well known Israel wanted to keep stealing land comes from, probably your own head. But you said that Israel wanted to keep the war going. Okay. If Israel wanted to keep the war going, why did they also agree to the ceasefire? You are so fucking stupid. Like it's literally right there in front of you. And this tells me and illuminates how little you actually know about this topic. And I have no fucking clue why you agreed to this debate. You said, take it up with the people who think it was a false flag. I'm taking it up with the people who think it was a false flag right now. You're supposed to be the guy who thinks it was a false flag, but all you're doing is citing the opinions of other people without bringing up any piece of material evidence. I don't want you to read 5 pages of testimony from each person. I want you to cite me specific pieces of their testimony that provide evidence for you thinking that it was a deliberate attack. Were they flying unmarked jets? What's the timeline? Did one of the MTB crewmates say, there, an American flag, I see it, and then they heard it from the boat, or what happened? How do you know? You said the recon jet. You brought up the recon jets. The recon jets that were sent out at, as you pointed out, 9 a.m. Okay, the attack started at 13:56. Big gap of time there. These jets likely did identify the ship as an American ship. And it's actually, we know from the Israelis, they had actually identified this ship as a possible friendly and marked it on their naval tac map. At this time, a naval tac map is literally just a piece of plywood with some plastic markers on it, So during shift changes, what happens is if you have bad intel that you haven't verified in several hours and the shift is changing, you remove that bad intel because you don't want a situation where now you have military assets in this place where you identified a possible friendly and that ship is gone. Now it's an Egyptian ship there, but they think it's a friendly. So they drive right by it and then get mowed down, right? Bad intelligence has to be removed. And at this point, this was bad intelligence. So it was removed at the shift change. Military assets are constantly in motion. They're moving all the time. And so hours and hours and hours and hours and hours and hours after you identify something in one place, you're not going to leave it there forever because those assets are constantly moving. When the ship was attacked by the aircraft initially, they were dealing with an active situation, a fluid situation where they believed there had just been an attack on El Arish's shore. And so they pursued the ship they believed responsible, that they had no intelligence on at that time, and attacked it, believing it to be responsible. Again, they were flying at 15,000 to 20,000 feet up in the air. They're not going to be no Navy pilot is identifying a ship by its flag. I interviewed a U.S. Navy aviator literally 2 days ago, and he told me, when you're identifying a ship, you're never identifying a ship as by its flag. You said, again, you went on this thing. They all say it was deliberate. LBJ says it was deliberate. The eyewitnesses say it was deliberate. Blah 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 blah. Right? We don't care. Right? Again, I don't care who you say they had an opinion that it was deliberate. That is, again, somebody else's opinion that I do not give a fuck about. I care about your opinion and what evidence led you to that opinion. And again, if you're saying eyewitness testimony is direct evidence, okay, great. Their opinion is not direct evidence. Their direct evidence is what they say they saw. So tell me what they say they saw. And you said, I spared everyone from reading this long thing. Again, I'll say it. I don't want you to read 5 paragraphs of what one person said. What I want you to do is identify little things that they saw that mount up and make you believe that it was a deliberate attack. Again, were the airplanes unmarked? Did they shout from the boat saying, I know you're an American, I'm going to kill you? What was it that led you to believe that it was a deliberate attack? And to be completely frank and honest, I don't think that you read any of the testimony. I think that if you're going to read testimony, you're probably going to read it directly from the sheet because you have no idea what the fuck it says. You talked about, and this will be the last thing, you said that I implied that you said the helicopters were attacking. I didn't imply that you said the helicopters were attacking. What I said was, you cited this thing where this guy said, this U.S. military official says that he heard somebody else say that they heard somebody else say that the pilots shouted out, but sir, it's an American ship and we're ordered to attack anyway. That whole testimony is references the NSA intercepts of the communications between the Israelis and their controllers. Those intercepts, the only NSA intercepts that existed, the only NSA intercepts that were ever obtained by the NSA, the only thing they ever intercepted was the communications between the Israeli helo pilots and their controllers. Again, I have linked that below this space for you to read. The helicopters never attacked the USS Liberty. So if he's saying the NSA intercepts say, but sir, it's an American ship and they were ordered to attack anyway, on its face, that's false because the helicopters never attacked the Liberty. That's what I'm saying, right? His claim can't be true if he's saying that they continue to attack knowing it's an American ship when the people he's claiming attacked never attacked. It doesn't make any sense. It's false, right? And it's been debunked now that those are declassified. And again, they're linked below this space. Read them. Go ahead. Right. That's all you've got. Yeah. Right. I'm supposed to believe that.
Yeah, but I think you need to relax a little bit, brother. So, according to those transcripts, by the way, since you want to bring up direct quotes from the transcripts, there were documents released showing that Israeli pilots had ID'd the ship minutes before the attack and passed this info to the Navy, where the chief of naval operations in Israel dismissed it and said that it was just Egyptian camo. They had the American flag, but it was only Egyptian camouflage in order to disguise themselves as Americans. And 2 other naval officers at the time reportedly suspected that it was a U.S. ship, but didn't intervene to stop the attacks. Those are directly from the transcripts. But you said it was.
Read it quote for quote.
Shush, let me finish. You just rambled for so long. You said that the USS Liberty launched an extremely effective attack on the Israeli torpedo boats that forced them to fire torpedoes and kill 25 American troops. How effective could that attack have been if it didn't kill any Israeli soldiers or cause any casualties? And in fact, as I said, the USS Liberty was not a boat that was built for combat, so they didn't even have guns that could allow them to defend themselves in a situation where they're being attacked by torpedo boats and airplanes. I mean, sure, maybe they manned the guns and fired a few shots, but what do you mean by an extremely effective attack? Extremely effective according to who? Israeli military officials who are.
If you were listening, I told you the captain of the Liberty.
Shut the fuck up! You just rambled for so fucking long. Oh my god.
You asked me a question.
To get through all
you said, who said it? The captain of the Liberty.
Shut the fuck up. They had 4 guns that were extremely small. And if this was an extremely effective attack against the IDF, why didn't it kill or even injure anybody? Why did they come away from this unscathed? Unbelievable. You say that I know nothing about this issue, but then you say that Israel had no intentions of extending the 6-day war. You say, why the heck would they stop taking land if they wanted to take more land? I told you, and this is very, very common knowledge, even if you read, the most mainstream or even most pro-Israel of sources, they were pressured to stop by the U.S. and the UN. Ariel Sharon said, now is our chance to take Nasser's regime once and for all. Let's not stop. They wanted to continue going into Syria and continue going into Egypt because, of course, the Israeli state is an expansionist project that's been growing ever since it was legitimized by the UN in 1948. So yes, they wanted to keep going, but the U.S. Didn't want to create a massive regional war. They wanted to wind down the fighting, and they didn't want to get sucked into it. They were already preoccupied in Vietnam. The anti-war movement was raging here at home. Lyndon B. Johnson was trying to get reelected. He didn't want to start this massive war in the Middle East that could have potentially pulled in the Soviet Union and the US. But you know who did want that? Israel, because as their high ranking political and military and intelligence officials were saying at the time, they wanted to keep going. They wanted to take more Syrian land. They wanted to take out Nasser's regime completely. So they only stopped because the UN and the US pressured them to stop. Now, I also think it's hilarious that you admit that the Israelis ID'd that it was an American ship early in the morning, and then your excuse for them then dropping napalm and firing torpedoes on that ship is, well, it was later in the day. So they identified what it was. They were able to, in the morning, to say, hey, that's an American ship. But then when they came back later with the torpedo boats, they forgot. They missed the giant fucking American flag on the boat this time and the giant English letters, and they fired away. Well, no, the torpedo boats were under an imminent attack, of course. They were rescue torpedo boats. I always send torpedo boats when I'm trying to help somebody. But yeah, I the main thing I think is interesting there is your misunderstanding of the 6-day war and the different interests at play there and how Israel's interests diverge from the interests of the US, because you were mocking me and saying I don't know anything about this, so why would I want to debate it? But I mean, you're missing very, very basic facts and pieces of background information on the 6-day war. Which is something I've studied extensively, as well as the transcripts that you keep saying I've never read. Which I do encourage people to go read those transcripts. Don't read them from Haaretz or whatever, but go read those transcripts. You will come away realizing I'm correct even more than you already are.
Yeah, Eddie. So I'm just gonna say, like, I would pack it up and never debate again. So you said that the
Nice.
transcripts show that you
Play
said
the
that the
laugh
transcripts
track.
show you said that the transcripts show that they identified the ship as American. Okay. Again, the transcripts are linked below this space. Just look for my tweet. Nowhere in there during the attack do they ever identify the ship as American. They do identify the ship as American at the end, after the attack ends. You claim that you've studied the transcripts extensively, right? Go read them. I challenge anyone in here to go read them. At no point do they positively identify the ship as as American. The pilots never identified as American. Okay. Nowhere in the transcripts. In fact, there are several occasions. You keep saying this thing like, do you expect me to believe that they didn't see the big American flag? Go read the transcripts. On numerous occasions, they're asked, is there a flag on the ship? And they say, we don't see any flag. And then at the end, during a low pass, they identify the markings on the side of the ship as CTR5. It's really GTR5, Charlie Tango Romeo 5. And then State comes back and says, fuck, stop attacking, stop attacking. And then they say, dispatch, the Navy is dispatching MTBs right now for rescue. We're dispatching our helos. Do not engage any further. Okay, that's about 1436 that happens. Okay, you claim that you've studied these transcripts extensively, and it's very obvious and clear that you haven't. Again, they're below this space. You said, I said that there was Extremely effective fire. How effective could it have been? Who's saying this? You asked me a question. You didn't let me answer the question. In fact, I've already answered the question for you. I said it while I was speaking. You're just not listening. I don't know if it's the CTE or what it is, but Captain McGonigal, the commanding officer of the ship himself, said that machine gun Mount 53 and 51 with less effective fire opened fire on the middle torpedo boat and blanketed it, quote, with extremely effective fire. That is directly from the U.S. Naval Court of Inquiry. Those are the captain of the ship's words, not mine. I'm not the one who's saying that. He is. So, in your words, take it up with him. But, he's dead. You said, I admit that they ID'd it as an American ship, but my excuse is it was earlier in the day. That's not what I said. What I said was it was old intelligence. Again, the USS Liberty was not in the same place that it was when they identified it. And when you have military assets that are constantly moving around, you're not going to keep bad intel on a board if you can't verify that intel is still good.
Yeah,
You can go ahead and
gotta
mute
bomb
yourself
it.
like I did. Go ahead and mute yourself
It
like I did.
moved. Gotta bomb it now. Can't tell what it is
Okay.
anymore.
So are we children or?
Gotta bomb it.
Yep. Okay. Are we children?
You're
or
the one
can you go
making
ahead and
ad
mute yourself?
hominem attacks, Fatty.
Okay. You can wait to return ad hominem when it's your turn. I don't care. That pretty much concludes what I have to say. I doubt you've ever opened the transcripts. In fact, this is a direct question for you, Eddie. What are the names of the two fighter jet squadrons that attacked the Liberty?
I don't know that. I know it was
Royal,
Monsieur Jet.
Persa, and Royal. You've never read them. Go ahead.
Okay, the reason that you want me to hyper focus on tiny little things in the transcript is so that you can ignore the broad evidence, so that you can ignore the extremely important.
Nothing.
Shut up. So you can ignore the extremely important points, like the fact that it was a clear day and that friendly fire incidents or mistakes like this don't happen unless it's in the fog of war or in a combat zone. You're ignoring the fact that the president himself said Israel absolutely did it. You're ignoring all of the eyewitness testimonies. You're ignoring all of these testimonies from high-ranking U.S. State Department officials who were involved in the negotiations in the aftermath. And you want me to focus on hyper-specific details like the names of the Israeli jets or whatever, the names of the Israeli battalions. So you could try to nitpick and ignore the mountain of evidence that says that this was absolutely deliberate. So no, I'm not going to go into minutia with you. What you're doing is ignoring all of my evidence, which is very, very powerful evidence that points in one direction. And you're saying that's not real evidence. Focus on my evidence, like eyewitness reports from IDF soldiers or whatever else. So it's a very common debate tactic. It's a slimy tactic if you know that you're wrong on the substance, which I imagine you do if you've actually looked into these as much as you say that you have. But I had something else written down. I don't know. I can't remember. It's mostly what you've got is ad hominem attack, nuh-uh, trying to go to minutia, and then quoting the statements from the Israeli government that, the ship moved. The ship moved a few feet. We don't know that it's an American ship anymore. Time to hit it with napalm. I mean, come on. And then to fire 5 torpedoes at it because they fired shots at you after you were dropping napalm on their heads. Like, come on, that's excessive. And the attack lasted a lot longer than you said it did, according to all the eyewitness testimony accounts. And we also have to be very careful with even these transcripts, right? We can't act like transcripts and not eyewitness testimonies and not even common sense or not even the weather are real evidence, but only these transcripts that have been put out by the Israeli government, because obviously they're very selective in the amount of transcripts that they would release. But what I recommend everybody check out is I believe it was Thomas Moore, his investigation into this in 2003, because that cites from a lot of naval lawyers who were involved in this case when the negotiations were going on, and a lot of high-ranking U.S. naval officials who will give you direct quotes on the event, during the event, and what they thought in the aftermath. It's very rare like this where you have an event where so many, like, the CIA director himself and the president of the United States at certain points have gone against the mainstream narrative, the quote unquote accepted narrative, which the U.S. only accepted in order to appease Israel, our great ally that bombs our troops. But yeah, I don't know. I think this debate might be winding down, but if you have anything you want to respond with and then make closing remarks, I think that'd be good. Unless you wanted to keep going, I'm down for either.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I'm down to keep going as long as you want to go. You said that I'm ignoring all the evidence, but in reality, I'm the only one who's cited evidence. Again, other people's opinions are not evidence. You haven't cited any specific
You
portions of
cited a
anyone's
lot of other
testimony.
people's
Yep,
opinions too, by
not
the
finished.
way.
No, I never cited anyone's
I
opinion. I cited
throw
what they
that
said
out
they
there.
saw.
Yeah, you
No,
have.
I've never cited anyone's opinion. So let me finish. I've never cited anyone's opinion. What I've cited is what the captain of the ship says that he saw, which, as you've pointed out, eyewitness testimony is in fact evidence, but somebody's opinion about testimony is not evidence. Okay. You said that friendly fire incidents only happened at night, which is the dumbest thing I've ever heard in my entire
No,
life. In
that's not true though.
2005, yeah, that is exactly what you said. In 2005,
No, it's
in
not, you
Afghanistan,
dumbass. I
I'm
said
not
in a
finished. I'm
combat
not
zone.
finished. You can
In a
respond
combat
later.
zone
This
or at
was a
night or
combat
with
zone.
adverse
This
weather
was a combat
conditions.
zone.
Well,
This
no,
was a
you're
combat
lying, so
zone.
I'm not going to let
I'm
you
not
just
finished.
lie.
I'm not finished.
Right, but
Okay.
you're lying.
You
If you
said
tell
that
the truth, I'll let you keep
I'm
going.
not finished, Eddie. Shut the fuck up. Okay.
Make me,
In
fatty.
2005, in Afghanistan, US F-15s opened up on Canadian troops in broad daylight. In 2002, in Afghanistan, a US AC-130 gunship engaged friendly forces. In 1991, during the Gulf War, a US Bradley vehicle fired upon Abrams tanks. Okay. This does not only happen at night. Furthermore, you said that the attack was longer than I said it was. It was 38 minutes. This is based on the transcripts between the Israeli fighter jet pilots and their controllers, and then from there, it's based on McGonagall's testimony. He's the captain of the ship. The reason I don't base it on McGonagall's testimony prior to the torpedo attack and during the air attack is because Captain McGonagall, I estimate, based on the Israeli transcripts, that the air attack was roughly 14 minutes long, starting at 13:56. Captain McGonagall says it was 5 to 6 minutes. He probably had adrenaline pumping through his veins, and he was probably he thought it was a little faster than it was because of how quickly everything happened. That was his estimation. This was when there was no more deck log, so he had to go purely off of memory. So from there, I take it off of McGonagall and Lloyd Painter's testimony. McGonagall says it was a little faster than Lloyd Painter, so I put it in the middle of each of their testimonies. Captain McGonagall is very clear about the chronology. He says that the USS Liberty opened fire from 2 different machine gun mounts, machine gun mount 53 and 51, with 53 having the most fire, attacked the MTB motor torpedo boats, and then they returned fire. You asked me earlier, why would you send out motor torpedo boats for rescue? Because they're small boats that move really fast and can get on the scene quickly, right? At the end of the day, they're going to send out naval assets regardless. You said that and by the way, like, if you're saying that it was longer because, like, Phil Turney says it was 2 hours long, there is zero evidence whatsoever to substantiate that it was 2 hours long. You have LBJ less than 2 hours after less than 2 hours after the start of the attack, already communicating with Alexei Kosygin, the prime minister of Russia, about the attack. So it definitely wasn't 2 hours, because it takes time for that message to get to Washington, and then it takes time for LBJ to say, all right, I better go, send a teletype message to Kosygin. Okay, so it definitely wasn't 2 hours long. On top of that, you said the transcripts are from the Israeli government, but that we should trust people that are in the LVA. And what I would say to that is, first of all, the Hilo pilot transcripts are not from the Israeli government. They're NSA intercepts from the US government. Furthermore, the transcripts from the fighter jet pilots, what they are is the Israeli government had the transcripts, and because they understood that Americans don't speak Hebrew, they had journalists come in and transcribe them and then publish them on their platforms. Those transcripts are, again, linked below this thing. And furthermore, if you want to say that we shouldn't trust them, maybe you should look inward and ask the guys over at the Liberty Veterans Association, Phil Turney, Joe Metters, Larry Bowen, all those guys, because in their Sacrificing the Liberty documentary that they promote and reference on every single podcast they've ever been on, and also sell DVDs of on their website for a profit, they literally reference the exact transcripts that I'm talking about. They cherry pick them and don't show all of the transcripts. They just show the ending where they say it's an American ship, apparently, which is the very last line of the transcript after they've soundly identified it as an American ship and the attack is stopped. Furthermore, you mentioned the Maurer report. Great. So Maurer had previously issued statements publicly believing that the attack was deliberate before he ever investigated it. So we have a confirmation bias there right off the bat. On top of that, the Maurer report was investigated or conducted almost completely under the purview of the Liberty Veterans Association, people who we know have a bias and believe the attack was deliberate. It relies almost entirely on the testimony of members of the Liberty Veterans Association. The whole thing is bullshit. It's the only report that concludes that it was a deliberate attack. It's the least professionally done one, and it's the only one done where we know that there is an absolute confirmation bias baked within it. So with that being said, Eddie, I think that you've failed to make your point. Again, if from this point forward you want to cite any material evidence, which I doubt you have, you're more than welcome to. At this point, you've cited nothing other than the opinions of other people. You haven't pointed to any specific testimony. This person said that this happened. This person said there was unmarked jets. This person said this. Whatever it is, you haven't cited literally anything other than other people's opinions. Go ahead.
I only have two more things to say. The first being that the debate over how long the attack lasted in terms of minutes, based on the different testimonies, is exactly what I'm talking about when I say that's a debate around minutia that isn't that relevant to the question of whether or not this attack was deliberate. And that's where I think you would like to drag this debate so that we can avoid or so that we can miss the forest for the trees, so to speak, so that we become so focused on these questions that we forget all of the massive pieces of evidence in favor of one argument or the other. In this case, my argument. The other thing, the Maurer investigation, you basically said it's wrong because it was supported by the eyewitness testimonies, the people who were actually there, the American service members who were actually there. So yes, I'm sure it's being biased and controlled by this group of veterans who survived the USS Liberty. Meanwhile, the pro-Israeli sources, I'm sure, are completely unbiased, not at all influenced by the Zionist lobby, not at all influenced by the Israeli state, various Zionist NGOs that operate in America. No, it's this group of veterans who survived the USS Liberty who are manipulating everything, including high-ranking U.S. government officials, in order to get them to push a narrative. It seems like you're kind of inverting reality. But the last thing is, it was not only the people who were there on the ship who were part of the Maurer investigation. It also included many naval lawyers, for example, who were told by the U.S. Navy after the event that they were not allowed to mention that it might be a deliberate attack. They weren't allowed to investigate that or even suggest that it might be true. And these were orders that Lyndon B. Johnson and his administration reluctantly, they didn't want to do this, but they agreed to this in order to protect Israel because they felt that they had to. But this is why there are so many reports from high-ranking U.S. government officials, because at first they knew what this was and they wanted to talk about it and do something about it. But after the negotiations with Israel, they decided to sweep it under the rug. And this is when all these naval lawyers and other people were told to keep their mouths shut. And the Maurer investigation speaks to many of those lawyers who at first listened to the U.S. government, the U.S. State Department, and agreed to cover up or not mention that it may have been a deliberate attack. But years later, when they felt that they were in more safety, they came forward and spoke to Maurer and gave their testimonies explaining, that this was a cover-up. But either way, Cam, you're boring my audience. They're all saying you got cooked, but it's been good talking to you again. We'll see you on the next one. There we go. I did what Destiny did to me, basically. That was getting old. I'm shocked he didn't pull the anti-Semitism card already. He can't because he's an anti-woke conservative or whatever the fuck. So, yeah, debating that guy sucks. I met him on the Jubilee Middle Ground debate, and we were cordial in person. It's harder to whip ad hominem attacks and stuff in person when, you can see me versus him. Which is why I kept calling him fatty there, which maybe I shouldn't have done, but oh well. I'm only human, folks. I'm only human. I can only put up with so much. But yeah, we were more cordial there, but like, I mean, he's just a young kid who wants to be a Fox News commentator, right? He's finding the path of least resistance to be a propagandist. I don't know if he's getting some kind of Zio money, or if he's being trained by Zios. I think I remember in the past he had PragerU in his bio, right? That's the kind of guy this is. He's the kind of guy who wants to get noticed by giant corporate think tanks, or these giant media conglomerates, so that he can work for them. He's a career climber. And actually, he had like a little meltdown on Fox News, when Fox News invited him to be a contributor. I believe he was talking to Laura Ingraham or something, and he had like a panic attack, which goes to show you, how this guy thinks. He just wants to get on Fox News. Being on Fox News, that's like the greatest thing for him. Holy shit, I made it. I'm a top tier propagandist. I'm on Fox News next to Laura Ingraham. And that's what gave him a panic attack and caused him to freak out, because I imagine he was nervous about messing up. 1 second. So that's who Cam is. I probably wasted too much time on that debate, but I thought it would be fun, and it was. But I just don't understand. Is this the right one? I'm trying to find the Fox News video because it is pretty funny. After that debate, I think you guys need to watch that. I'll read the chat in a second. I think Jackson uploaded it, actually. Yeah, he did. So here's Cam on Fox.
Intentional. It's Hamas's plan. This is all intentional. It's Hamas's plan. The problem is that their plan is essentially to spread this propaganda throughout the internet by using sorry guys.
All right, let's go to RA's. Cam, get yourself together there, my friend.
The launching of missiles from densely populated urban areas like the Gaza Strip.
What happens again?
Essentially, they want people to see what is happening. I'm sorry.
That's all right. Ari, I want to get to this politically.
So that's Cam. Poor guy, bro. I've met this dude in real life. My instinct there is to feel bad for him if he wasn't having a panic attack because he was failing his audition to become a full-time propagandist. But what was I saying? Yeah, when I watched this, actually, because Cam has done a lot of work, a lot of his more viral stuff and what's gotten him on Fox News has been covering the pro-Palestine protests, like the encampments, and portraying, all the pro-Palestine protesters as a bunch of terrorists or, crazed woke liberal terrorists or whatever, just smearing them in general, right? He goes and interviews them and gets out of context clips, making them look bad, and then tries to give those clips to Fox News. It makes me wonder if, there is some kind of Zionist backing there, because that would be the path of least resistance, right? If you're a young person who desperately wants to become an imperialist propagandist, the path of least resistance would be to be a hardcore Zionist and smear the pro-Palestine movement, because there's all this Zionist money right now that will pay you to do that. I mean, I've told the story. There was a guy on TikTok the other day who posted a video ranting. He's like, man, I've been doing pro-Israel streams for like 2 weeks, and this organization promised to pay me, but they never did. Fuck them. And then like 2 days later, he was back doing pro-Israeli live streams. Like, they're absolutely paying people to do this shit and say this shit and take these positions on certain issues. I'm not saying Cam is, but if I was him and I wanted to become a full-time propagandist and work for PragerU or whatever, that's what I would do. But what do I know? I'm just somebody who only gets funding directly from their audience and stands on principle.